What's up, good people of the world? So, welcome to a behind the scenes of Eastern Skies. It has been a long time since I wrote this piece. Let's see, 2014. So it has been a while. It was a really fun piece to write, and some parts of it are pretty typical, orchestration, but I think there are some interesting things in here and some different techniques which may be useful to you guys and gals. So I'm going to go through it. First off, instead of just playing it from the Sibelius score to remind you what it sounds like, I'm going to play it from the PDF and an audio file, because the original score with the extrapolated parts, so like 4 horns on different staves, which no performer plays back properly. I don't know whether or not I accidentally deleted it or I just changed that score to the edited score. But some of the brass aren't as loud as they should be, because when it goes A3 or A4 and all horns are playing unison, no performer only plays back the sound of one horn. So that'll be fine when we go and look through the details. But just to remind you what it sounds like in the balance, I'm going to go ahead and just play it from an MP3 and scroll through the score. So yeah. So that's fun. All right. So let's check it out. Let's open up the Sibelius file. Okay. So first things first. Compositionally, the kind of cliche, Spanish gusto kind of, Legend of Zorro, typical, scores in this style generally use a lot of the fifth mode of harmonic minor, right? So an A would be A, B flat, C sharp, so you get that A, B flat, C sharp, D, E, F, G, A, and sometimes they will sharp the G as well, so you get a full and sometimes it's just natural depending upon what you use, but generally in that harmony, the tonic is, of course, 1, and then there are 2 chords which can both serve as a sort of dominant to tonic, and they both work very similarly to each other, which is the flat 2 chord and then its relative minor, which is G minor, right? So, the vast majority of this piece is made of that harmony, and there are some exceptions, but just to let you know, compositionally, it's pretty much just those 3 chords just kind of shifting up and around, tonic. So, all right, so let's check this out. So first off, of course, the trumpets really do lead this piece. They've got the melody a lot of the time. They've got lots of fanfare material, okay? So first off, we start them just playing this, typical kind of cliche, bum, ba-da-dum, right? And this is in their golden register, and I think the reason that I chose this key A major is because, 1, it doesn't have a lot of sharps, right? It's, especially if you use the key center which we're using, or sorry, not the key center, the scale, right, which is, it's not A major with 3 sharps, it's A major with a B flat and then C sharp, but then lower G and F. So it's really the only 2 accidentals you have to worry about is C sharp and B flat, right? And of course they love B flat because trumpets are in the key of B flat. So this whole You know, that B flat, that A, that G, those are like the highest, really comfortable notes of the trumpet. So I purposefully chose this key to be really just punchy and golden for the trumpets. So anyway, so yeah, so we have this, which is just moving up the scale, and then they switch into chord, bum ba dum bum bum bum, right? And we have 4 trumpets here actually. Or no, I think, yeah, that was a copy and paste error. That should not be there. But yeah, so that sounds like this. Right, and that at that tempo, you know, making leaps really quickly, would be really difficult. But at that tempo, that's a great place for them to be. And again, even though this piece, it was not necessarily intended to be performed by live players, it was written as if it was for live players. So these considerations, you know, I tried to make. Anyway, and another thing I want to point out that happens a lot through this piece is where the melody comes in, or a hit comes in, or the trumpets and the high stuff comes in, and then the low end comes in. That was, I remember distinctly when I wrote this piece, that was one technique that I wanted to try out. You know, I had not written any music up to that point where the, you know, the upper end of a hit or the lower end of a hit happened at different times. It was always just the hit. So, and I think it was, I was studying a Williams score and noticed how he did that, you know, where he had like boom, boom, and then the other instruments came in. So that's the most important thing to consider, is that the trumpets literally come in by themselves, and then everybody else comes in, and that allows them to be heard individually, and it also gives more power to the hit. And that technique is repeated later on, where you have boom, 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 boom. You know, my hand gestures being the bass notes, the low, the thick, the rich harmony. Okay. Anyway, so once the trumpets introduce themselves, we have the strings, which are basically just doing a scale upward, and then they go into some figurations. And there are several common figurations which I use throughout this piece. One is kind of the Flight to Neverland, if you ever heard that cue, which is, Danny Elfman also uses it a lot. It's a pretty common cliche heroic thing. Anyway, it works. He really gives a sense of da da da, 1 2 3 4, and then of course just arpeggios missing the third. That's also a really common thing for strings to do, and again, it's easy because it's just string crossing. So, and then another thing that I do use a lot is this sort of bum, 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 which to me is a kind of condensation of the da, you know, like those those exotic Arabian singers, and the sort of little quivers that they do. That's kind of an imitation of that. But again, it's not really muddy, because they're just really just sitting on one tone, just the tonic, and then with a little bit of a neighbor tone embellishment, right? So yeah, so, and then also I use the ET thing, which is, you know, bump 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 bump, which works really well with you know, works really well with straightforward melodies like this, because it's very complementary. And again, you know, this is not just exclusive to ET. It's used in lots of trailers. Dum dum da dum dum da dum dum ba 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 ba. And people use it in other scores, and I try not to use it when it's very obvious, because then people recognize it from ET. But in this case, it's very much something that sits in the background, and you don't really consciously hear it. It's not like a theme or anything. So, but it is something that I tend to avoid using nowadays. But you know, this was back when I, you know, just was a little bit less concerned with being, you know, cliche with my writing. But, you know, I don't know. It's a controversial thing. But anyway, so this giant chord comes in, right? So we got the bassoons on this low note. Again, voicing is important. You know, that's a great note for them, right? It's I wouldn't want to put them in octaves if I wanted maximum power, because the A up an octave would be a little bit lighter, and I just really want that richness. So I have both the bassoons down there, and then of course the horns playing this open chord. Right, it's all a great place for them. Trombones in the stacked fifth, right? I want to push up to E. There are a couple of reasons why I chose to do this instead of that. You know, one is because the fifths tend to sound really good, and the and trombones just in general. And the second is I didn't want to overstate the bum, because it already exists in the horns as well as the trumpets. And then the other reason is because I want this E to emphasize the top note of the trumpets, bum, ba-da-dum, right? rather, if I went dum, ba-da-dum, in other words, if I had the trumpets play what they played and then the trombone comes in, the trombones are so loud, especially in that tenor register, that the C sharp might pop out too much. Might be splitting hairs, but I think it was definitely a conscious decision. And plus, also, when you push bones up into above middle C, up to like G and even B flat, that's just a great range for them. I think people often don't write high enough, or don't write high for the trombones often enough, I should say. And then, of course, we've got bass bone and tuba. And again, I'm not going to push tuba way down there because it's going to be difficult to hold the note that long. And tuba, I think people tend to write too low for the tuba. The cimbasso is great for getting the rasp down there. But, you have the double bass. The double bass can play the really low, which is what we're getting down here. Like the double bass is going to give all the resonance you need on this low A, that sounds great. So there's no reason to push the tuba all the way down there if you just have the bass trombone and the tuba and then the cello, which is a very common thing. They have pretty much everybody up in that bass register and then only have the contrabass go down sub bass register, and sometimes contrabassoon if you have it. So right, you can hear that sounds really nice. It's mostly the upper octave, but you can really hear the low double basses giving that rich resonance, because you don't want to have an instrument that's too sheeny down there, because it's going to add muddiness. Because remember, the lower you put the instrument, the more the overtones become salient, and then they can interfere with the clarity of the sound. Anyway, that should be respelled differently. But anyway, so we have strings doing triple octaves, a very common thing for power. Right, and rather than going bum ba da dum bum bum bum, I have them going da 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 ba ba bum. One, because it's a nice 9/8 suspension, and two, because it's adding a little bit of interest where the bum ba da dum bum bum bum, where pretty much all the other instruments are being still. So if everyone just bum ba da dum bum bum bum, I feel like there's space missing there that could be filled up. So that's why I filled that up with the string section. And again, the fact that everybody's unison here, parallel octaves, that was on purpose. In this case, it's parallel fifths, which is fine. In this style, the parallelism gives it an exotic sound. So there's absolutely nothing wrong with parallel fifths in this exotic style. Anyway, so that's pretty much it for the introduction. Very simple. And again, of course, the timpani and bass drum and cymbals come in with the rest. And there's a lot of fun timpani stuff. So, dum 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 ba dum, boom bum ba dum. So yeah, all that together. Right, and then we get this nice little bass line. I love giving fun bass lines, especially for this type of music, because they love it when you have a great bass line. Too often composers' bass lines are boring. So right, and again, there's nothing wrong with, and it's very common when you are writing modal music like this with specific modes or scales, to sort of change back to traditional tonality in order to make a melodic line better, right? So, I'm not just going to stick to B flat exclusively, right? So in this case, for the nice, rather than having the augmented second, but to have this, and then B flat, right? Because it makes a nice, because it leads the half step. The B flat really wants to lead down to tonic, right? So in this case, since I'm going up rather than going down, I mean, it probably would sound fine with B flat here, but it doesn't have the smoothness that I want. Right, it's a little bit more disjunct. So that, in other words, you don't feel like you're locked into a scale and you can't, use any mode that you want to get what you want. Anyway, but of course, yeah, this all leads, and then there's a bit of splitting here again. I want to bring the cellos up to do. And a lot of composers would do something like this, right? And they'll just copy it, and then they'll say, okay, for this next section, I want the cello to play up high in this tenor register, right? And then you get this nasty voice leading, right? And they could play that, and it wouldn't really be a problem because they're just jumping their bow to another string, but it's just not satisfying. If you don't give the individual parts horizontal continuity, it's just they're not going to have a satisfying time playing. With that slight adjustment, which still fits with the harmony and still works part writing. Listen to how much more satisfying this is. Right. So little details like that. Always check for your horizontal continuity in the parts. So anyway, and then there's some terrace dynamics here where I give a second for the violas, and then they pop in. And then of course harp run, and this I wrote it like this so that it would play back properly. But of course you'd write a gliss, you'd write the first 7 notes out, or you could just write a pedal diagram. And you can see in this case too, I didn't use the B flat, I just used the C sharp, and then the rest of the left minor, so it has a smoother scale, more scaleo sound. Right. And I believe I led them up as well to the not the tonic, but the fifth, right, which is one thing that I like to do. It gives a very bright sound. And of course, we already have plenty of A, so to have the harpist go up to the dominant instead of the tonic, in this case E instead of A, I think is a nice sound. So yeah, and then the woodwinds are doubling that, and of course we have the bassoons and the tuba, which I did push them down to this lower register because that's not too low for them. And of course I left them out, boom, bomb, and then they come in for the the hit, the secondary hit. That does a couple of things. One, it gives them some breathing room. So bum 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 boom boom. That's a lot of playing. So if you let them take a breath for a second and then come in, they'll be really in tune, and they'll have a lot of power. Whereas they'll quickly run out of steam on this note, especially the tuba players. But anyway, but again, yeah, that's as fast as I would write for them, unless they were like a really really great players, and I was trying to write like a concerto for orchestra. But that'd be really fun to play. Right. So and then again, the rest of them come in. Timpani and bass drum comes in the second time, and then in this case the contrabass is there all the time, so it's not like it necessarily doesn't have any bass and then it comes in, but it's just there's an extra push on the secondary theme, and then the cymbal plays twice. And I think in any other style of music, that might be, the cymbal might be a little bit overused, but I think it's okay in this instance. So we've got all horns and trumpets playing the melody in this case, with the trumpet splitting out. Right, and then again, this type of splitting is really common as long as all the parts have good voice leading, right? So think about this, so let's think about, what would it be like to be trumpet 3? Boom, ba dum boom, bum 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 bum, bum 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 bum, or to be middle trumpet, dee da dee dee, be dee doo doo, boom, 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 boom. Right, so they all have smooth parts. So even if you split trumpets off and you put them back into A3, make sure you're thinking about all the individual lines. And then of course the horns, we leave in their in unison, so that the melody doesn't pop up, and they're really good at supporting it down there. Bones again have this ET thing. And I think that's pretty much it. Strings are in, giant octaves, which is, again, very, very common. Right, and again, notice the bowing here. When and when not, you want to use slurring or have things accented as. Let me go into a panorama mode here. Anyway, yeah, there we go. Okay. But yeah, so this texture is pretty simple and pretty, and notice also the gong too. I didn't want to use the gong every time, but I do it every once in a while to get again to just to give it that epic sound. Yeah, like that. And the only other thing I want to point out about this section, because it is, fairly homogeneous, is the dovetailing here. Oops. Where are we? Back here. Yeah, so you can see, this is basically like, right, second, and then. So the oboe can't do 2 octaves very easily because you're getting really high up in its high register and it's getting thin up there. Remember, I don't want thinness, I want power, and I can't push it down because the oboe is pretty limited in its low range. It can't go below like middle C that much. So what I did is just had both of them play, right, using both of them. And that type of thing is very, very common. Lots of composers do that. And then they both come in, you know, and then this... You know, that's a good place for them to be because you're not pushing the upper ones high enough that there's going to be a problem. And then that works really well for the clarinets too because it's in the clarion register and the chameau register, so you're avoiding that B flat break area. And then of course, you know, the flute and piccolo, it's great to push them up into the ledger lines, especially like E and F. That's really comfortable for them to play and very loud. So again, yeah, this is all orchestrated just for pure power. Yeah, and then again with the part writing here, don't just make it homogeneous, make it interesting. Right? It's not just triads, but... So... Dee dee doo da 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 dum. Or... Dee dee doo... Yeah, that's fun. So... So again, giving them all their own, it's kind of like first species counterpoint, you can think of it. And again, in this case, you know, you would need to avoid the augmented seconds because we like that sound. Okay, so yeah, getting into this new section, okay, we have this new melody, which again is just literally just B flat, A flat, or sorry, A natural, or B flat major, A major, A, B flat again, so again, it seems boring just to look at it on paper, like A, B flat, A, B flat, A, G minor, A, B flat. But I'm telling you, in this style of music, it's just very common and it's a very beautiful sound. Okay. Anyway, so we're using a typical cello string figuration. Right. And those types of things are very easy to play, especially if they have open strings. Like in, let's see. What am I thinking of? Yeah, right there. That D would be an open string. So, you know, if you have, and that just goes for string writing in general, and you can look up like what string stops are possible, but when you have triple stops, especially quadruple stops, you want to give them as many open strings as possible, which makes it easier to play. Anyway, yeah, for a more homogeneous sound, I could have just, with this, done, you know, had, you know, them play the melody and then a sixth underneath, right, just to have the parallel sixths. But having them both in octaves, I think you still get enough melody, right? Because it's not like I'm splitting the violin so to play a different note, which again you're risking losing power. But but you are making it sort of an interlocked thirds voicing, right? And of course we get it forte down an octave in the violas as well, up with the, and then we get this octave sixth, right? And it starts out in parallel sixths, but then it switches to a counterline. And again, you know, keep your eyes peeled for when things like that can happen. Again, it'd be easy to just do parallel sixths the whole time, and that would be fine. You know, it worked nicely. But you know, I was looking at the melody and I was thinking, okay, you know, if we look at the what the lower part is doing, it's A, right? And we could bop A down to F, and that would be fine. There's, you know, it still works with the harmony, but it's nicer to have the contrary motion, to have the A just slip up in stepwise motion to the B flat, because the F drops down to D, and then you have a major third, right? Again, it's just counterpoint. And I think that gives them a nicer independent line, as opposed to do da 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 dum boom, right? So, and it doesn't distract from the melody because the melody is in more parts than the harmony. Anyway, so and it gives it a different sound, the sixth from the third. And then we've got contrabass and right, and the reason I have them on 2 octaves is because the cellos are doing something. So all of that together sounds like this. And then up on top, we've got the bones doing their dump, 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 and then the flutes in both their octaves. And I think in this case, I decided to go with octaves because it's not so loud that that lower flute is not going to be heard. And that lower flute is not like, you know, as long as you're above B flat, you still do have some resonance. And by pushing them at forte, you know, I think it would sound better to have them play octaves than to have them both together, which would have a bit of a pale, watery sound, and the vibrato would get a little weird unless you have like big tooties. Or just to drop, you know, just to not give the second flute player anything to play. So I think, you know, just to do all that is, in my opinion, the most effective way. And of course, we've got this, you know, timpani, which they can do all with 4 timpani, right? And that's another nice thing about this music is because you only have 2 chords. You know, you have the tonic and dominant of each chord. That's 4 notes, and you know have 4 timpani. So it's great for a timpanist. Anyway, so yeah, so bass drum, and again, they're at mezzo piano. Timpani is at mezzo forte. Gong, mezzo piano, very quietly, so as not to distract from the melody. All of that sounds like this. Right, and because the secondary phrase is almost exactly the same as the first phrase, it's just down half step, you know, a different chord, I decided to fill up that space with a woodwind run. So yeah, and which is really just scalier. It's, you know, right. And let's see what I did here. Yeah, and I decided to go with the augmented second in that instance, and a little bassoon push for that, you know, moment, and then a little cymbal. And then again, you know, whenever you repeat thematic material, change it up. There's no reason to not. Still give it the same feeling, but if we just repeated it with the same strings, you know, it'd get a little bit boring. So it kind of chills out for a little bit. We have this harp thing. And again, I don't know whether or not I've said this in another video. I think I have. I think I said it in the very first Let's Write Music. But, you know, I try to treat these accompaniments sort of like drum fills, where you have, like, the same pattern repeated for 3 measures, but then the 4th time, you change it up. So, you know, you know, so the repetition keeps it nice, but it would be really boring if you just didn't give fills. So that's kind of what I do with things like this. Right, I feel like that works very well, and it makes the, you know, because if the harpist was just sitting there just playing literally arpeggios, it'd be really, really boring. And it does pop out, you know, if you hear it by itself. And in this case, it works well with the melody, and it generally tends to work well with melodies just because melodies, it's at the end of the phrase when the melody tends to have a holding note where they kind of finish a phrase, put a period on it, and then begin a new phrase, and that's the perfect time to do something interesting with these accompanimental figures. Anyway, and then of course Pitts bass, which I rave about all the time, and a very common technique. You know, and again, you can just take the, it's not, as long as you don't have the third, it's never going to get muddy, so it's fine to, you know, boom, 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 boom. You know, again, right here, I could just have this be an F, but it's not as good voice leading. Which, you know, it's fine, they can play it, but if you have the B flat down here, it still functions harmonically, but it makes it really nice. Right, it leads into the next thing, and that's what makes your music sound like organic, as opposed to just like, you know, sections. So anyway, what else do we have going on here? We've got the hook thing up here and oboes. So right, and actually, if I remember, the reason that I decided to change it up here was because it sounded too much like hook, so I decided to quickly do something different. But it does make it more interesting for them. Right, rather than just a little, you know, all those little details again. And then of course with flutes, but this time I didn't do them the same every time. I only had one playing up here, and then piccolo a second time to give it a bit of a sense of completion, like the melody is finished, because it's really high. Right. And all of that together sounds like this. Right, here's where it gets fun. Right, that's a fun little run. I think this is a flat. Yeah, so I'm kind of, my thinking with this was both modulation harmonically as well as going to A flat is kind of the same relationship that A has to B flat but inverted. So it's kind of like a negative harmony type thing. Right, and then basically using harmonic relativity, what A flat, the relationship that A flat has to A is the inverse of B flat to A. But now A flat is the flat 2 chord of a tonic, so our new tonic is basically G major, right? So A flat, and then yeah, and then we've got this line. Right, and then this right here uses the horn fifth thing, if you're familiar with it. Right, keeping them still so it's not just the same. I mean, I'm sure you guys are familiar with it. Right, if I have if I'm basically trying to voice exchange a sixth into a third, so like C on bottom, A flat on top, and then A flat on top and C on top, you can go through this fifth, E flat and B flat, so C and A flat, E flat and B flat. And you hear that, it's very, very common technique. It solves because sometimes sixths don't work on certain degrees of the scale, and sometimes thirds don't work. You know, it depends upon the context and what the harmony is. So in order to turn a sixth into a third without a big massive jump, that's a great way to do it on the first 3 degrees of the scale. So again, all this works contrapuntally. Right, and then that's filled in with this. So again, just kind of noodling around the scale. It's kind of fun. And then the bass line is still pits. And again, making it interesting. So adding the 9/8 suspension is something I like to do a lot. So all keeps it interesting, but without making it muddy or contrived. And I think this is a case where I definitely sped it up. Or not sped it up. I added an extra bar or two because it originally went you know. It immediately went to that next section, but I added 2 more bars just to really give it that sense of, you know, and then it gives the harp a chance to change pedaling, so they sort of join in with their thing. And then the only other thing that's added, because there's, you know, since there's so much complexity in the strings, I decided not to do too much. But then there's clarinets, right? So, and again, that's right for the B flat break. But because it's not B flat to B natural, B to C, back and forth, you know, they can play that. You just don't want to do it repeatedly. So, right. And honestly, that's probably something that I should have dovetailed. But I don't know. Any clarinetist, let me know whether or not that right there is an issue. Navigating the break. Anyway, so all that together sounds like this. And notice the harp come in. And then we have this sort of elision here, right, where we have the new section, but then I don't just want the horns to come out of nowhere, so they kind of lead into it. So, you know, and again, you know, to have them, don't just, you know, have parallels all the time because it gets a little boring. So to throw the sixth in there makes a nice lower counter line. Right, gives it a nice little bit of independence. And then that space is, or not that space, but it's filled up with tertiary fluff, as film score analysis would put it, and the trumpets, right? And it doesn't distract from them because they're just playing the same tribe, right? Triadic stuff. Pretty straightforward. And then of course we have the bones are doing their typical thing, and then the pits is doing the thing that they did before. So it's all pretty standard stuff, you know. String run. So now triple octaves with the cello doing their figuration that they did before, and then these types of repeated notes with the trumpet works very well. Right, because like brass instruments can't play like 16 notes jumping up and down or doing scales and stuff unless it's like a really good key for them. But repeated notes, that's they love that stuff. And then again, bringing in the winds for the second phrase to sort of give it a sense of, terrace dynamics. Right. So again, just triadic stuff here. Nothing too crazy. Right. I didn't want to change all the notes in the lower trumpets to different chords for each of those because it would muddy up the harmony, and I also wanted to focus me on the ya da 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 dum, so that's why I only changed the upper note and not the lower note. And then of course I gave the bones a fun little thing. That fun. So dum bum bum bum. I'm trying to read it. Dun 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 dum bum 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 bum. So that's fun. And we have bum 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 bum, right? And then right, so all the parts are nice melodically, but again, put it together and it's like, fun. And then timpani really gets their first big timpani fanfare. And then it goes back to the, actually harmonically, I'm interested to know, how did I get back to this key? See, I don't even know. Sorry, I haven't looked at this piece in so long. I probably should have looked at it ahead of time. So we modulate to A flat from A major. Then G. Right, so we're still in G major, and then we go up to A flat again. We just get there. Wow, that's funny. So like I was talking about in my Let's Write Music video recently, this is a perfect example of where sometimes you can literally just not even transition and just immediately go into there. So the relationship of A major to G major, A major is brighter, and it's a Lydian 2, right? And it's common to have key relationships go from G major, or go from the 1 to the major 2, increased sense of brightness. So we literally just went from G major to A major without preparation. And I think it's nice in this piece because, at this point, again, because the harmony is so repetitive and so simple, just 1 flat 2, 1, minor 7, the fact that we got away from A major, and then when it comes back, it really does feel like a sense of return rather than, we're just hearing the same freaking chord progression over and over again. This is all verbatim. Yeah, and then just a just a coda tacked on at the end. And again, you know, sometimes you can just I'm generally not a fan of, like, you know, sonatas or symphonies from the classical period where they just repeat the exposition exactly. But sometimes I think it is very effective oftentimes to repeat it in the exact same way within the recapitulation, right? Because you haven't heard it in a while. You know, if you heard it and then immediately hear it again, that to me is a little I don't know, splitting hairs. But if you've kind of gotten away from it, then to return to it, there's nothing wrong with having it the exact same way. But of course, this time we get this big coda, which is built out of, it's a very similar texture, but the trumpets sort of turn into the ET rhythm, but then with added bum bum ba-da-da-ba-dum bum ba-da-da-ba-dum 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 bum bum bum. Right. So again, the repeated notes. And then a last little rise up and stinger. And then, of course, all the bass instruments are, and we have a cymbal with that as well, but all the bass instruments are doing boom, bum, boom, bum, but so there's not so much of a tonic and dominant relationship. I do have the strings just playing A octaves, the contrabass just playing A octaves to give it a sense of rooted quality. Right, so that really makes it just feel like we're on A major the whole time as opposed to A, E, because remember, E isn't our dominant relationship. We haven't used a dominant in this entire piece because of the modality, right? So it's really important that it just feels, the E feels like the fifth of A rather than like a different note, you know, because in a symphony, you have the bum, boom, bum, boom, bum. That's sort of a truncation of or a diminution of the tonic and dominant relationship of the entire piece. But in this case, it's different. So, and again, this is really high for the violins, but they can definitely do it. It's not terrible. E.T. goes way higher, and it's way harder. This is not a difficult key either. Anyway, so all that together with the wind doing the same bum, 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 bum. And again, another reason I like A major, G major, B flat major, anything around those three notes, because they have really great high notes for the flute, because it gets hard for the flute, or the piccolo, because once it gets too high, it's really too high and you can't push it. Like C is pushing it, you know, and then you have to push it down an octave, so then it's really not good. But I think in the high A of the piccolo, and by extension the flute, and then it's not too low or too high for the oboes, and again, so it's a great range for all of them, maximum power, especially that piccolo. Like, that's really gonna pop out. So yeah, A major, G major, A flat, B flat. B is hard because it has lots of sharps, but I would say, yeah, B flat, A major, G major are the best keys to write for orchestra in terms of like power, just because of the hits you can get. So let's see, yeah, and then we have a final last run up with the strings, which is just scale-wise motion. And then the timpanist has a fun little thing, which again they can totally do because it's literally just like, you know, tonic and dominant. Yeah. So, and I think that's probably pushing it. Yeah, I think the way that you could solve this problem, because right now the problem is we have this E, which needs an extra kettle. So if we did A, had A. I'm interested actually because right now this is not playable by 4 timpanists because we have 6 different notes. So you know we could do. We could do that. So yeah. Yeah. We could also take out that A. The hemiola kind of messes it up though. That would work. Anyway, so yeah, so that's a problem that you'd have to solve, or that I'd have to solve if I was to make this for live players. But of course, in a perfect world, you know, you want the Yeah, and of course this big, bum bum boom boom is really nice. I think that's what makes it effective. That the horns going down and the strings going up, boom 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 boom, and then they meet together in the center. And again, saving the last hit. So yeah, and I didn't want the last hit to be too high, which is why I dropped out the winds. I just had the bassoons playing a fifth, low fifth, which is nice. All the horns playing this low A, all the trumpets playing this low A, and then the trombones are what get the bulk of the chord and give you the third of the chord. And then tuba and the bass trombone down an octave. Yeah. And then of course the strings are basically all just playing octave A, so that's a very low indie chord. It still has the high stuff, but it's very much, Anyway, so yeah, that's it. Again, not a lot of, I wrote it a long while back, and it's definitely not art music by any stretch of the imagination. But it's a lot of fun to write, and I think it's, pretty fun to listen to. So not everything has to be super complicated and crazy. So anyway, so yeah, let's go ahead and listen to it again with the audio file. So yeah, and I purposely made it very short, A, B section, which is quieter than A, because it's sort of like a trailer theme. You could think of it, like I wanted to write a very short kind of promotional type, or the introduction for like a television show or something, or the introduction for a movie. So yeah, the only last thing that I think I forgot to mention was the little string wind down. Yeah, over right here, and that's a really common thing, right? And then rather than the strings, and I did this in Iguana Man, I think, as well, rather than the strings just sort of staying on there and then doing they can sort of hit that note and then sort of wind down. And again, they all lead to their own spot. And I think what I did, because the only people that needed voice leading was the cello, because they all have a rest there. Right. Even though they're actually all on B flat anyway. But the reason I came up with this is because of the cello. I wanted to lead down to the B flat, and then I popped it up into the other string instruments. So anyway, I just wanted to point that out because I missed that. But yeah, so I hope you enjoyed this video. I'm going to make a lot more of these because there's a lot of music that I've written. So I think next I'll probably do the horn fanfare. And that has some more interesting things to talk about harmonically and in terms of part rating and problems that I tried to solve related to the idiomaticisms of the horn. So that'll be fun. Anyway, yeah. Adios.